Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome to our 7th session of Empowering Women, Public Space and Climate Change. It's a pleasure for you to all be here. Thank you for joining us. So about this session and what Empowering Women Public Space is, just to give you a little bit of an explanation before we go on to our inspiring speakers, of which we have 3 joining us this evening. And so Louisa, my co-organizer, will be sharing a little bit about the speakers in a moment or so, but I just want to give you a quick outline of what Empowering Women, Public Space and Climate Change is, if you've not joined any of our sessions before. We aim to really just create further awareness and research, and hopefully now also projects on the ground on female-led initiatives, with gathering experts from a variety of sectors, with a focus really on empowering diverse women around the world, engaging and inspiring with the debates and the discussions, and taking a real sort of inclusive approach to highlighting women working in these 3 fields of leadership, female leadership, and of public space, and those that are working in climate change. And as we know, certainly with today's session, this discussion is not solely for women, it's also for men, of course. We need men part of this discussion. And also we really do, of course, recognise the need for more gender equality, racial and social justice, with taking more of an integrated and systemic connected approach with the different sectors, from local government, from private sector, right to grassroots and civil society organisations. It's really the sort of idea that together we have this sort of opportunity to enhance the climate responses, from the social issues to the supply chain, from poverty alleviation to gender equality, as mentioned. And in this session, we'll just be really exchanging and sharing and highlighting projects and research and case studies, with taking a global perspective with our extended partners and our extended network, and those working in collectives and initiatives to those working in private sector, really discussing the sort of challenges and also the potential for the positive impacts that we can create with the projects and the research on the ground, emphasising, of course, the strong link of these topics and how they intersect together, of the public space and the climate change in communities and across the world. So Louisa, on that note, I pass on to you to kind of share the format and introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Rosina. And thank you all for joining this 7th talk of Empowering Women, Public Space and Climate Change. We are growing this initiative, having today the first male speaker joining this session, but I also see some other names and another men joining this session, which is very refreshing, since so far we have been just talking with women, which is good. But as Rosina said, we would like to expand this discussion beyond gender, since this is something that is related to our society at large. So I would like to give the floor immediately to the first speaker, since we have 3 speakers, and we would also like to have a conversation with those attending this webinar. Usually at the end of the presentation, so we always have a very nice discussion also with people participating. So we would like to also give enough space to the discussion in the end. So our first speaker is Maria Fernanda Pineda, that is part of Fundación Avina, supporting projects in public spaces and sustainable management of plastics. Maria Fernanda has 10 years of experience managing projects on environmental awareness and climate action in Latin America. She studied business engineering, climate change, design thinking, and brand management. She co-directed the Azione Sostenibile NGO, focused on environmental education for children and youth, as well as on the development of CSR program. She worked as a project coordinator of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation's Regional Energy Security and Climate Change Program, highlighting projects in sustainable local governments and circular economy. Welcome, Maria. You have the floor.
Thanks for the presentation, Luisa. Thanks for the invitation, Rosina. And I know that you do the introduction about me, but I will also tell everybody here in the meeting that there is also part of the team, of the ground team, that implement the projects that I'm going to talk about in a little bit. There's part of the team in here. Marion Verdiere, Elizabeth Sanchez, Sylvie Dumans, and Cynthia Chimabukuro are part of this incredible team, and I want to share with you what they've been doing during the past months. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Okay. Let me know if you see it like in the whole screen.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Luisa. I know that I have only 10 minutes, and I know that you see that there's like 30 slides, but most of them are images of this incredible work, and I'm just gonna go through it really quickly so we can have space for the discussion. And of course, at the end, I would like my colleagues, or maybe at the discussion space time, my colleagues can also add some information and answer some questions. Okay. So yes, this is the case of female builders and inclusive urban planning on 4 sites across Lima. Our Bible for this was the Her City Toolbox project, which is part of the UN Habitat. And this was our main guide to go through all the whole project in these different 4 places in Lima, Peru. So the Her City Toolbox promotes girls and young women's participation in urban planning and also in design processes to create these inclusive and sustainable cities around the world. It has different step-by-step boxes, but like the main objectives of this toolbox are support urban development from a girl's perspective, have these guides urban actors to implement these projects, also provide different tools and open and digital accessible platforms for the people involved, and it also facilitates this ongoing dialogue between the people who implement this project and the neighbors of these places. So there is these 9 step-by-step, which we call these 9 blocks or block by block. Even when they are 9, that is like available in this toolbox, there is the opportunity to select some of them from these different 3 main phases: the assessment, the design, and the implementation. And you can like personalize it or customize it depending on the necessities of the place or the specific place where we're going to implement the project. And it also includes different online tools. For the case of Lima, we use one called Inhabit Place, where this tool let us map and monitor how this specific place was being used by the neighbors. So this Her City project has its present is being implemented, is being used in over 300 cities, and one of them is Lima, where this partnership between ONU Habitat, between Fundación Avina, which I'm part of, and also with the strong support of Ocupa Tu Calle and Mano a Mano organizations. And we did this during the last months of the last year. So I just wanted to add some information about Avina as well, which promotes the sustainability from collaborative processes. And we also want to generate these large-scale positive impacts. We have different programs, and one of them is the Sustainable Cities one, which was the one selected to match and to do the partnership with UN Habitat. And we have different projects or different experiences in Mexico, in Ecuador, in Brazil, Argentina, and Peru as well, specifically in Lima. And to do so, we did this partnership to connect different opportunities to achieve these systemic changes with Mano a Mano and Ocupa Tu Calle. I don't know if you know, if you ever been in Peru or in Lima specifically, but Lima is a huge city. It is a 10 million people city, or over 10 million, and so it means that the city has a lot of challenges. So the four public spaces that we selected were in the north and in the south of the city of Lima. And thanks to this opportunity, to this experience, we had the chance to support over 5,000 neighbors in these different areas to create retaining walls, to create a more resilient space, to work with women and girls, to increase their participation during the different process of the block by block experience, and also to create these green and productive spaces with urban gardens. To do the experiences in the north of Lima, we had the strong support of Mano a Mano, which is an association and an organization that is based here in Peru, like since the 90s. This is a French-Peruvian organization, and we had a chance to work with a project that they've been working on since 2007, which is called Mujeres Constructoras, or Female Builders. This project is really special because it was created as a response to give an opportunity to single mothers that didn't have an income and that needed to have an income to support their own families, and also as a response to create greener and public spaces in this area of Lima, north of Lima, which is in Puente Piedra district called La Ensenada. And thanks to this project, which has been working way before her city approach, they've been creating over 5,000 square meters of parks, most of them productive parks. And they also had the chance to motivate the entire community. So the community, at the beginning of the project, they used to look at the female builders like as a joke, but now the female builders has gained the respect of all the community because of the work that they see that's done in there. And also there is a chance to involve different children. The organization has these different workshops during the summer where female builders have these different conversations and dialogues with the children, so they can have interesting reflection on the gender equality, that cooking, carpentry sports, or different kind of sports are not only for men or women, but that can be sorry, I'm going to admit someone which is in the waiting room. That can be something applied or played by different people and different ages as well. So with the block by block workshop, they used 4 or 5 blocks of this project, where they did the assessment part with the sites and with the visit of the sites that they identified to improve, with the participation of women and some children as well. They had the opportunity to be trained in the using of Minecraft, this game that is really popular between the children, and it let them did the creation of the improvement that they wanted to see through this tool. And also, since there was this ongoing project called Female Builders, they were the ones that did that construction by themselves. As you can see here in the photos, the implementation was the creation or the improvement of two passages or stairs that connect different parts of the community. And this was experienced with Mano Mano, and for the sites 3 and 4, we did this with Ocupa tu Calle. We did this intervention with El Óvalo and El Cerrito Hermoso parks. Ocupa tu Calle is a long-time partner of Fundación Avina, but it's also a key actor here in Lima and in Peru to improve the quality of urban life from, for, and with the people. So the challenge, as in the first two sites, was to make these women's needs visible in the use of enjoyment of the public space, to do this articulation and to increase the participation of women of the community, and to promote also this youth leadership. So this was this part of diagnostic of the places that were going to be intervened, and also the participation of the women of the common pots. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's mainly when different women of one community get together to cook one meal to provide for their neighbors of less resources. And with this process, they were able to implement these strategies that were mainly proposed by this woman and the children of the community. This was at the south of Lima in a district called San Juan de Miraflores. And since Ocupa tu Calle was already working in this area or in this place called Pamplona Alta, they decided within the community to implement these sites 3 or 4, El Óvalo and the Cerrito Hermoso Park, close to this El Mirador 2 park, which was previously implemented by Ocupa tu Calle. And they had a similar experience, I mean, with a step-by-step or block-by-block implementation. So they have this assessment part with an inhabited place. They have different workshops with women in the main space, but they also have the Minecraft workshops in partnership with the university. So most of the children were familiarized with the use of the Minecraft. They designed their spaces there as well. And after that, they have different or several workshops to validate the designs that were made in the Minecraft one. So they have this, you have this before image of El Óvalo Park, and the children, the women, but mostly the children designs their own games, a place to compose and rest area, and the urban gardens as well, and the retaining wall. So in this specific partnership, we didn't have like the female builders as in the 1 and 2 sites, but Ocupa tu Calle had the opportunity to employ local people that had experiences in construction. And since the inauguration of the places where kids started to use this space for 3 or 4 hours long, they've been using it more. They feel more empowered to use these parks, and as lessons learned that also apply for the whole project here in Lima, the team identified that there's an opportunity, or it is important to have a sustainability plan of the urban interventions, because they were already inaugurated, but they need to have a maintaining part as well. And it is important also to think and design the city with a gender approach, this was able with the Her City Toolbox. And involving community implies an active use of the space, not only doing workshops to have the verbally or the expression of the neighbors, but also to let them use the space to observe and see how they use it. And of course, it's key to have these articulations between these different actors of the community, of the finance, with the support of Her City Toolbox as well. And just to finish, these are some photos that you can see, like the before and the after of the project. Above you can see the one, this is Los Alamos. Below you can see El Ovalo Park, it's part of the inauguration. And this is the first two images. At the top are El Rosario passage. And we recently had the inauguration of El Cerrito Hermoso Park. So this is mainly based in something that we love to say in Avina, this collaboration or colaboración. And this is key and to make these projects possible. So thanks for your time. And of course, my colleagues are here to have a further discussion as well. I have to give it back to you, right, Luisa?
Yes, please. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Maria. I think we will have the chance to discuss later with other speakers and attendees. Maybe Rosina, you want to introduce the second speaker?
Yeah, that's fine. Absolutely. I can, I think, reclaim the host, so I'll just take that. And I can introduce, as we were saying, our first male speaker of Empowering Women, Public Space and Climate Change, Jorn Verbeek. Jorn drives the KPMG's Net Zero Urban Programme, and he also leads the Decarbonisation Innovation Exchange for KPMG's Global Decarbonation Hub, brokering business agendas, innovation, finance, policy, and science for the climate and energy transition, with a focus on urban challenges, innovation in key emission sectors, and the Global South agenda. For the Belgium firm, he's responsible for the ESG work in the public sector, so that's environmental social governance, with plus 20 years sustainability expertise in both public and private sector at local and international level, and a journalist by training. Jorn, I didn't know that until you sent me this bio. Jorn easily embraces complexity by combining the different agendas and perspectives of stakeholders involved, and has years-long experience of turning them into ambitious yet feasible action plans. So last thing here, Jorn, you bring obviously a deep expertise in innovation and energy transition, and in the circular economy and public-private partnerships also, and the theory of change and transition management. He's advised cities worldwide and large multinationals, small-scale startups, local, national and international governments, global NGOs and science and research institutes. And another thing that we always certainly try and emphasize here is to have also more private sector join us in these chats, as well as having the men. So Jorn, I'm going to pass over to you to present for us. So there you go.
Thank you very much, Rosina. And I'm really honored to, well, this time I didn't turn you down because I think you reached out a couple of times. So apologies for not making it any earlier. And as I said in our quick talk before joining the session, I'm, I think, a bit cautious or trying to find my way still, especially as you announced me as the first male speaker. And I think the introductions are, of course, always horrible. They're way too long and a lot of titles and jargon. I think what you might want to take out of there, and because you hinted at the journalist training, I think I've been working in both public and private sector, but I've always tried to keep that journalist angle and to try and see like which kind of society do we live in. And before you know, you get that hard split between who are you as a person and who are you as a professional. And I think a lot of people are able to combine it, but I see ever so more people that often feel it's really like a rigid barrier. And I think for me, it's always important to, especially in this topic, when we look at a city, when we look at public space, when we look at women, girls, but also children, how do I look at a city being a father of 4 kids, being a husband, using a city, having grown up in a city, but also lived outside of a city, to just keep looking with journalist eyes and to see what is actually triggering, what is a city actually. And I think that takes me to my first slide. And don't worry, I'm gonna rather do a more personal story than a great professional PowerPoint. Let me check, because I think the screen is not following completely. Hang on. Let me try again. No, not yet. It's a bit rare because my slides are not moving.
We see your screen, but not in full screen mode.
Ah, okay.
So just put it on full screen mode.
There you go. It was weird because I had another version. Is it better now and in full screen mode? Fantastic.
Yes, yes.
Sorry for the delay. So building on that journalist angle, I was in Amsterdam quite a couple of years ago, and people who have been in Amsterdam might know the place. It's actually an old warehouse where there's often debates on what is the city for. And I really took this one, who owns the city, because it's also a question that kept me busy for many years. And when I now talk in professional context about cities, people are often asking like, oh, it's about city administration and the city mayor, and it's about politics. Where I say, well, hang on, I've been working in both public and private sector. If I would be talking to my peers in private sector, they would say, no, it's like the biggest portfolio of assets and investment. It's about buildings, it's about mobility, transport, it's about utilities. And of course, they're both right, but still at the end of the day, it's not only public and private sector, it's places where people live, it's places where people grow families, where they have kids, where they love, where they meet friends. And I think therefore this question on who owns the city is for me also linked to who's making that city then. Like, how do we design a city and who's involved? And I think especially I'm based in between Brussels and Antwerp. We have a long tradition on participation because Belgium is a quite small and dense country. Well, there's many people or many agendas and many interests that often conflict. So I think we have a long tradition in participation, but at the same time, there's still for me a void in what are the roles, responsibilities that are connected to a city as well. Now, going back to Amsterdam again, it's really nice to see that they, over the years, have created a trusted space for dialogue, but also for soft conflict, where you sometimes see that, as I said, agendas are conflicting, where they're not matching, where there's a discussion. I'll take an obvious example, where they at some point invited also people from Amsterdam when there was the refugee crisis to say they're also people, they're also looking for a home, they're also looking for shelter, they're also looking to raise their kids. But let's get them all together. Let's just have like an open dialogue like we do here, but then in person. Let's have dinner together and see where dialogues go. And it's of course a really easy example, but at the same time, it's something that we still don't do often enough, to just get people together again. And I think that's also for me something when I talk about cities. This is another image from a city I've worked in for quite a number of years, city of Ghent in Belgium, where at some point we also said, if we look at the city from a citizen's perspective, how much of a city is actually not being used, or it's being used or reserved for cars, but then actually at some point we want the cars out of the city, but then we are looking at empty streets or streets that are full with parked cars. So let's do an experiment, and I'm talking about more than 10 years ago now, where we transformed the streets, and I think there were a bit of similarities in the presentation by Maria just before me, to see what can you do actually with public space the moment you give it back to citizens. And not just to say like, well, there's no cars today, you can just like play on the street, but also do a soft programmation to say, let's host dinners in the street, let's host sharing ateliers where we can do bits and pieces of circular economy, or just get like a kind of daycare going in the street. And it started actually with just like one table and a couple of chairs that ended up with small gardens, as you see. And what started with 1 or 2 days or a weekend ended up at some point being just the full summer period. And there it was good to realize when you saw people getting together that many of them had been neighbors for so many years, and suddenly they're next to one another at a table, sharing things to discover. We have so many things in common, but before it was just leaving the house, getting in the car, driving to work, getting kids from school, getting back, open the door, get in the house, and just missing that social cohesion or connection to just share who are you. And just by having that connection, I think opens up another kind of dialogue. What are needs? What are challenges? How do we live and use a city? And therefore, for me, it's important to always look at a city as a living organism, and not just to say there's public and a private sector, and let's keep it at that. Now, after many, many years, and I said it's going to be a bit of a personal presentation, I had been talking about cities and policies, and often been saying, well, it's important that, or these stakeholders should be put around the table, or we should have this or that item on the agenda. But after a couple of years, I felt, well, I think I've been working long enough in cities to bring with a bit of credibility my vision. But at the same time, I was always preaching, I felt. So we decided 3 years ago, my wife and I, with a couple of other families, to buy an old monastery just outside of Brussels, to practice what we preach, and to not only say like, well, transition should happen, but it should be on paper or should be in a policy, or we should look at a pilot project, but to really try, what does it mean to live together again? And how do we better integrate, whether it's kids, whether it's girls, whether it's women, not only in the decision making, but also in the design of the project, and to see what are the barriers we will be confronted with and how do we go about them. So we bought this old monastery, and we're now transforming that into a co-housing project with 35 families, but also giving space for daycare, giving space for a community bar, giving space for a number of ateliers, meeting rooms, so that the neighborhood can actually enjoy the space again, but also coming with ideas. This is missing for the moment. This is something that we need. Could we co-create it together? And by using the joint capital or the joint leverage of so many families to say, we can also give something back. How do we involve neighbors to redesign, not just our monastery, but a bit of the neighborhood? And there you always see that there's, of course, a bit of tension with the local government saying like, who are you to come and take over part of our municipality? But at the same time, we see also many people that show up now every weekend, because we are often in the place, and that start to interact and to say, hey, this is actually a really good initiative. How can I come help gardening in the weekend? Because I love a bit of social contact. How can we maybe do something together where we have a movie evening, or even a debate, whether it's on inclusion, migration, or just on how we can cook differently. And I think that's, for me, a good shift when I look back on those 20 years working with cities, that in the many cities I've worked with, and I think it's a common name to you, Jan Gale, from the Nordic countries, from Denmark, to look at cities again as people cities, where people should be more included in the design. And I think in one of the sessions where I had a chat with Jan Gale, at that point I had my very first child, he said, like, Jörn, do you think it's normal that when you bring your kids to school, you're always like afraid that when they come to the end of the street and they're always running because they see friends, or they're eager to go to school, that you should be afraid that they don't stop at the end of the street and there will be a car and that they're in danger. He said, why did we never design cities with pavements that go from your house to the school? And it's like cars that need to cross a pavement rather than we all the time stopping for cars. And the reason why I explain that now is that it suddenly made me realize what we see is often what we accept as a given, something that has been there for long time. But in the end, I always indeed went to school with the idea. I had like a 4 or 5-year-old running and was always like ecstatic to see his friends again. But indeed, at every corner saying like, will you stop in time? I hope so. But just the mental shift of why didn't we design pavements that go from house to school? Just that. And I think for me, it's also a reason, and that's why I share it tonight, whether you talk about girls, women, kids, to just take these narratives or take these visions into account the moment you start to redesign. Now, of course, it's a bit more complicated than that. And the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of movements towards 15-minute cities, towards donut economy, many different forms where people are trying to rethink the city. And we've also, of course, seen that apart from mitigation, climate change, also adaptation needs, how to bring green water back into the city, that there's so many conflicting agendas. And at the end of the day, whether you're an investor or policymaker, whether you're working private sector and NGO, there's so many needs that you need to fulfill that there I come back to participation, not just in the way of we need to get as many opinions to then make a decision, but to really understand how do we design a city for all the needs, for all the challenges that addresses all these long-term challenges where a city is confronted with. And I think there, key for me in those last couple of years is that we often see that a city is a reflection of what the past culture or the past narrative has been, but at the same time, it's also a pocket of the future where you can have a number of pilots and demonstrators to show this is what it could be. And I think that visual aspects in a city, and that's where I want to link it to climate change, is really important, because you see now there's almost a polarized discussion going on is it actually real? Is it going to hit us? Do we really need to change? But by making things visual, and it's not always about the big city planning, it can be small scale initiatives like the one Maria was talking about. They're really important to show, hey, it's possible, but it's also an improvement. It's something that we should like build on and replicate to other parts of the city or to other cities. And by preparing for this talk this afternoon, it finally gave me the opportunity to also read what Maria has presented on her city. And I think this I took from the introduction to the study, where it's indeed women and girls benefiting less from urbanization than men and boys. And I think there's to a large extent history and culture playing a big role. I think it's also the way we go about economy, about currency, but even about the internet today, which are, I think, to a large extent male designed and therefore male oriented. And I think if you ask me now, and I want to be really weighing my words and be really cautious, if we want to rearrange those things, it's not just by, I think we need small scale examples, but at the same time, we also need to be able to have that larger dialogue on what is the current societal system and what actually needs to change by design to avoid that we still are doing patchwork solutions in saying this actually needs to improve, but really rethink on how did we get here? Why is everything so male oriented? And of course, you talk about not only design, you talk about the way we are educated, the way we are nurtured, the way we are everything together, whether it's from education to the way our families are built, the way we interact, to the way we communicate. I think all of these elements come together in the more systemic design of our culture. And I think these two elements, for me, are too far apart, where we, on the one hand, see in the system there's things to be changed, and at the same time we see small-scale experiments, but it should become mainstream, how to make that bridge. And there's 5 elements I want to bring in the discussion. It's my last slide. When I said I want to be cautious about my words, there's so many discussions now on woke polarization. It is becoming really black and white on the political level, but also I see in the streets, where we sometimes try to fix things with quotas, saying that needs to be the minimal level we need to achieve. But at the same time, I also want to talk more about energy. And when talking about a session, I had a talk with one of the women in our team, and she was yesterday at an event in London where there was also the International Women's Day as a team in their session. And I asked her, like, what was your biggest takeaway? And she said, like, well, if your session tomorrow is going to be about public spaces and urban planning, she said, for me, it's more bring a feminine energy of kindness, of care, of thoughtfulness to the urban planning, to also include women in the design rather than hoping that the outcome will fit them. And I think these are elements that I feel she put exactly the right words on what I couldn't express this afternoon, where it's really that systemic element, but also that energy, which I think we often look at like, yeah, that's maybe a bit, I don't know, above our heads, spiritual, but which for me is really tapping the essence. Another element links for me to rules, responsibilities, and moral duty. If you link that to quota, I think we see, of course, a lot of rules saying like, we need to change and this is what we need to achieve. And I think it's important. You need to have a number of rules because if not, you might stay stuck in the old. And at the same time, the more rules you have, the more you take away the moral duty of having that conversation on what do we actually want to change? Who's going to pick up a role and responsibility to say, hey, we can do this differently. We don't need just a rule for that. We want to have it lived. We want to have that energy brought in. A third element, and I think climate change there can be rather an enabler to bring more of that feminine energy into urban planning and public space, is to help with access, agency, and empowerment, where we see that investments now, whether it's in energy, that make it possible for women to have connection, mobile networks, where it's possible for women to be educated, where they also see how they can play a role in not only addressing climate change, but also the communities around them, where we see changes in social rights because climate change is really disrupting the way people live. I think these are elements where we should build on climate change actually as a big enabler to say, how do we get that dialogue in the right direction? Fourth element, backcasting and forecasting, but also bottom up and top down. When I said cities are for me a reflection of what we saw as the narrative or the vision in the past, they're also, I think, a vision on the future. But there's also the need of using that systemic approach that combined with that bottom-up approach on how to give unheard voices a platform. And there it's really on opening up the dialogue. And I'm not talking here about participation, but really making sure that everyone who's living in a city also is heard. It's not about those that can scream the loudest. It's also about those that you don't hear. How do you bring them in? Because before you know, you start to design something where you again are suboptimal. And then the last element that I can only really agree with Maria, but also again, thank you, Rosina and Luisa, for inviting me. It's really about show what is possible. And I think it's really important that, and no comment there, Maria, it's really important that we have a toolkit, that we have a vision, that we have a policy. But at the end of the day, I think it has become such a heated debate, whether you talk about gender, whether you talk about climate change, that just by showing what is actually possible, it even goes beyond the debate. It's just showing what the future could be and almost inviting people around you. Yeah, what is then missing? Is it not an improvement for all of us? And often just by doing it, it opens up the dialogue, but it also shows that there's nothing that deserves such a heated debate, but it's actually, well, making life or everyday life better in something that you understand. So I'll leave it there, and I said more of a personal feedback on the invitation rather than the big company talk. But any questions to whichever professional or private side, more than welcome after, of course. And I'll try now to give back.
Thank you, Jorn. Yes,
to you.
To me, please. Thank you. Actually, it was a very good mix, balanced mix of personal and professional, because this is something that also belongs to us as human beings, not just as experts, let's say, in the field. So I guess there will be some questions for you later, but I would like now to give the floor to the last speaker of today, Nuran Bassam. A feminist urbanist and architect. She is cities and people enthusiast. Hence, she does her best in her work and research to activate communities and build an inclusive, sustainable cities for all. She's advocating for placemaking, playmaking, and interactive design processes that respond positively to the needs and aspirations of the community to activate the role of communities to shape their lives. She works on amplifying women's voices in their cities. She is the author of the upcoming book, The Gendered City, from her project How Cities Keep Failing Women, focusing on gender and cities, bringing light to these omissions and to the subordinate situations of women in cities. Cities for too long have been failing women in mobility, economic empowerment, safety, representation, and many other factors. Founder of Gaming X, a think tank that enables urbanists and placemakers to develop and create play spaces and activate urban places in the city, focusing on marginalized, underrepresented kids and girls. She's also a PhD candidate in the scope of resilient communities and the built environment. Welcome, Nuran. I will give you now the floor so that you can share your presentation.
Nuran, before, or Louisa, when you passed it on, I think Paula was in the waiting room. Somebody may have been in the waiting room. So if you see someone who's trying to get in, please just let them in. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I am admitted.
Paula's in there.
So, okay, perfect. So thank you, Louisa, for this introduction, and I will be sharing my screen. So I hope now it's on full screen.
Yes. Yes.
Perfect. So as Jorn, today I am today taking off the urbanist and the architect cape, and I am talking as a feminist, so more radically and intersectionally. And I am a bit talking about a part of what I'm writing in the Gendered City, and taking from my project, How Cities Keep Failing Women, that works on humanizing data and amplifying women's voices to share some of their failure stories in cities and their own experiences. And we should remember that radical feminist rebels are not residing in archives. Most are still with us, and radical feminism is not our past. I believe it's our future and our present. And no social movement has healed the structural fractures of racism, class oppression, homophobia. Feminism is no exception, and it works on these layers as well, intersectional layers and fractures of racism, whiteness, classism, and transphobia. And we, as urbanists and researchers, we need to look towards fighting inequality and oppression in our cities as well, and for more just inclusive ones. So our city has a gender, and it's a heteronormative, patriarchal white male, and I love this quote of Saidiya Hartman about the historiographical bias. What are the stories one tells in dark times? How can a narrative of defeat enable a place for the living or envision an alternative future? And it really tackles this and interrogate historiographical bias and the stories we don't hear of like archival bias. So archives are not neutral, and archives, like the things we don't discover in archives has less to do with digitization or description, but it is historical internalized racism, classism, and sexism, and ignorance of marginalized identities. And silences in archives are the voices that are missing, the gaps in the historical record that archivists have made decisions over time about who and what is deemed important to be preserved, and these decisions have influenced the historical records and our collective memory as nations. And as well, in our urban environments, we have this symbolic yet important biases for commemorating and building narratives in the city to either commemorate or obscure some of the historic and archival and memory of the nation. And even in this Virginia Woolf statue in Bloomsbury, and it's like a movement for more inclusive statues to be presented, yet her bisexuality, although it's centric in her writings, it's never mentioned. And it's a bit as well, we need to ask ourselves as researchers and urbanists, what is missing and who is missing and why. And we have to be ready to listen to all the narratives of girls and women and marginalized groups in our society. And as well, street naming, it's highly symbolic, but by forgetting women names in naming streets, it influenced the history, and their invisibility in the public space is reinforced. And it's only 12% of street names in Paris, for example, after women. It's after a feminizing street names initiative as well being done. And yet there are still a lot to be done in that sense. So this is as well, college classrooms may be the place where students first learn about intersectionality, yet their experiences in dormitories, dining halls, and sporting events, those who should work for their education, their jobs, and these halls become the places where they first live the intersectional maybe bias firsthand. And according to UNESCO, public space refers to an area that is open regardless of gender, race, and ethnicity, while on the contrary, it has been observed that cities are designed with the gender, the white, heteronormative, patriarchal male, and it is usually making cities only accessible for a specific group of people and making it problematic for people deviating, we can say, from the hegemonic standards of the city. So from my experience and personal experience as a woman of color from Arab descent, I realized that spaces are patterned according to the notion of perceived gender and color and ethnicity, and it complicates how rights are mediated and can be conflict with other members of the society. From my series, How Cities Keep Failing Women, as I mentioned, personally and through online platforms, I gathered some of the responses of different people from different parts of the world, and it's really it's really amazing, and it's something like every day I love to read and check for new responses. And this is a response from a transgender woman mentioning the relationship I had with this space for a long time of my life was completely aggressive and violent. I was a boy who walked in these streets, suffered physical and verbal aggression from various spaces, and more by men and boys. And it's really amazing because the responses come from different parts of the world, and people always ask me, like, which city exactly is gendered, and my response is usually every city is gendered, and it is about as well, not only gender, but this intersectional bias and elements of different layers. And we can say that our economy is built on women unpaid labor. There's still the pay gap, a safe city and mobility. And then I love in this, I love always to mention this Leslie Kern quote about as well, no amount of light in the streets will dismantle the patriarchy. And as Joran said, it's a bit, and a lot has to do with the social construct of the societies and the work people can do from their own homes, raising boys and departing from the this misogynistic ideas and gender roles and towards more inclusive ideas. And violence can be analyzed both via how it traverses intersecting systems of power and as well by how it is organized across domains of power. And this intersectional analytic tool can make us see how it connects racism, patriarchy, nationalism with other constructs of the society. And urban planning that fails to account for women's risk of being sexually assaulted is a clear violation of women's equal rights. And women are often scared in public spaces, actually twice as scared as men. And we have data to prove it. And as well, the wealth gap can be, and economic gaps can be analyzed through intersectional elements, not only gender, but some people are far more vulnerable to changes in the global economy and where others benefit disproportionately from them. And we need to see in this lens, not this or that, but this and that, in order to have this more like holistic vision of what we want to reach. And as I said, it's always about the voices and the archival biases and the stories we hold, that people hold. And I would love to know more, of course, about them and how cities keep failing you in different genders. So yeah, thank you. And it's been an honor to be here. And with International Women's Day, I decided to be really radical about this.
Thank you, Nuran. Thank you for your presentation and also for your very straightforward concepts related to how cities are constantly failing women. Yes, it's very important that we make such strong statements if we want to actually progress in a way of including women in different ways, especially for what I'm developing now, because I'm into many projects related to public space that are intended to establish first a certain culture related to public space before starting the design activity, because that culture means that we are covering all these different aspects that are currently missing in the urban planning and design practice. So it's not just about hiring a woman to design a public space, that's not the solution. But well, maybe yes, part of the solution, but mostly it is about establishing a different mindset, that deep culture that is necessary to actually make a real change in the way we envision the future of cities and the future of public space. So now that we have all these different, contents provided by our speakers, I would like to open the floor to some of the questions from the audience, if there is any question. I can't believe there is no question.
Don't be afraid to participate.
Yes, please, don't be shy.
Maybe to encourage, we just move to a couple of the questions that we had, Louisa.
Yes, in fact, we have several questions that Rosina kindly prepared for this meeting. So I will start with this one. How can we encourage more support for women leadership positions across the private sector, ensuring good governance in not pink or green washing, which is exactly what I was saying. So how can we actually produce a change in the way we work, in the way we establish our projects or presenting outcomes of activities? How can we include this very strong message? How to also make sure that others understand the difference between, having like a number of women participating and actually moving to something that is really conceived as a different way to proceed. I know it's a very complex, difficult question. I don't know if there is an answer, but this is a question for the three speakers. In the way you work in your practice, do you see any possible path leading to this systemic change?
Happy to jump in there, Louisa, and maybe stop the recording. That's safer. No, jokes aside, I think it's a really good question, but at the same time, that's where I think chose for the word systemic, because if I look around in the organizations I've worked in, there's so many things that come together. And that's where I said, on the one hand, I see organizations I work with, where they put in a number of quota and where you get the healthy dialogue on, are we going to appoint women, or are we going to go into more ethnic appointments just because of the numbers or because of it's the right people? And almost having that discussion is already loaded with a lot of tension. I think beyond that, for me, it's also how do you organize work? And I said, I have a wife, I have 4 kids. Just by the design of our society, I think it should almost be a choice for me by now, if I want to do my work correctly, that someone says, like, I just paused my career. And in our family, it can be either me or my wife. And there's no like, it should be me because I've maybe still a bigger age still. It's really an open talk by only taking the school hours. If you just do a 9-to-5 job and with the school stopping at 3 in the afternoon, by design, there's already a stress on someone in the family. And it's by default, if I look at the families at the school gate, still a woman that is not able to just do the same. So it's just not beyond having the discussion and like bringing more righteousness in it. It's also like what is actually conflicting or what is creating a barrier to have that equal participation. And that's just then even only a Western position. I think if we take it from a global point of view, where you look at the day-to-day reality in different regions, there's just not the same access. And I think that's part of, and I was happy that Nuran also spoke to that's part of the cultural design. And to change that is not easy, but I think it's the only option we have if we want to come to that equal point on how do we all participate in the same fashion, whether it's to public space, to climate change, whether it's just to society as a whole. So I don't have the 1, 2, 3 answer yet. I can only point to a number of things that I feel this is something that should be addressed, but it should almost be, and that's where I brought in the human element, the organizations where I feel there it's working. It's often starting with a director, someone at board level that says like, we need to change, we want to change, because it's almost a personal conviction that it brings also benefits, not only revenues, but also benefits in general, as in a better workplace. So therefore that human factor, that it's not just like the system deciding, no, we are the system. How do you give back that voice and responsibility?
Thank you, Jorn.
I know that Carmen has
Yes.
her raised hand. I would like just to answer the previous question before that, or just
Please.
share some ideas.
Yes, please.
Because at the current moment, the projects that we show to you are basically supported by foundations, associations, foundations or associations of the private sector. No. And I think there's still a gap between how we can have a better approach to the private sector itself, not only through their own foundations or social responsibility area. I think that maybe one idea can be like how we can see these projects as a business model in order to also think about the own sustainability of the project, even when this support of UN Habitat, for example, or I don't know, Fundación City. I mean, in the case this external support of international cooperation, it is not longer there, right? So how this female builders project can sustain and can maintain through the time, maybe one answer, and I don't know if my colleagues from Mano a Mano or Patucay want to add to that, but maybe one answer can be this approach as a business model.
Thank you, Maria. I think also Nuran wants to say something, and then we'll pass to Carmen.
Oh, okay. So I think if municipal staff are not trained on gender issues, so we need to train municipal staff. The lack of sex disaggregated data, it needs to be a thoroughly gathered situation analysis, decision making in the policy development, in the project planning, in the implementation and monitoring and evaluation process afterwards, and gender mainstreaming, and it involves bringing this gender perspective and gender lens to take place in municipalities or so. So I think, and maybe some harassment in public transport, there were some useful case studies, like maybe women-only public transport worked in many cities like India and in Cairo, and some tailor-made additions to the system as well. And yeah, and it's a complex, of course, thing to tackle. So Carmen.
Yes, Carmen, are you there? You are.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Okay.
I apologize. The internet here is not as stable, so I may go in and out. So I apologize. But my question is, for working with marginalized populations, the tolerance for discomfort, just for things not being the way they should, the tolerance is high because they have always experienced things not being equitable or good, whatever, for whatever the intersection may be. So my question is, how are we helping marginalized communities distinguish between something that is just difficult for everybody versus something that is specifically difficult for them and should not be that way due to their higher tolerance for things being incorrect, for being wrong, for being unequitable? Because my gut says that if I were to go say to people, hey, this shouldn't be like this, or we should be thinking about how this works, they're going to say, well, it's not that bad. Or if you ask them, they're not going to identify certain issues as actual problems because it's something that they've lived with all their lives. So how are we helping people distinguish between what is the marginalization that they're experiencing versus what's just difficult about being in a city, period?
Who would like to take that question? Thanks for asking that, Carmen. I've been laying low because of my cold, so if someone else wants to jump in there, that would be super. Nuran, you want to take that one, perhaps?
Well, it's as well a very complex issue working with, and it's true because I think it can be their tolerance is high, but I think, and I like the idea of maybe urban like quality audits from gender perspective or from maybe like intersectional perspective to evaluate maybe some neighborhoods or to have this look about the situation, but and of course participation and including everyone from the different groups, but it's still like a lot of work to be done to complete this full citizen participation, to listen to everyone and yeah. So but I really like the idea of like quality audits with this gender lens or intersectional lens for the marginalized.
Thanks, Nuran. Anyone else want to give feedback to that, Maria?
Yes, thanks for your question, Carmen. I think it's a really important one. I'm just thinking about, for example, the Manaman experience. Marion and Sylvie are here. Maybe they want to share it a little bit more. But for example, that organization is based in this vulnerable space in Lima. So since they are based in there, they started to give different points of view, or starting to show different possibilities of how the people that lives in this community can improve or could improve their own lives, because they have this external point of view that is sharing their day-to-day life with them. I found that experience like really particular, because it's not that common to have an organization that lives and share the day of the community. So that was experience with Mano Mano, and I think through them they had they could do what they could do with the Female Builders project. But I'm not sure if most of the other organizations are able to move and to establish in the specific vulnerable or marginalized zone of the city to do a work like that. But that is the experience of Mano Mano.
Thank you, Maria. I don't know if Jorn wants also to say something in regard to this.
No, I'm reflecting it. Thanks for the question, Carmen. I think it's really the in-your-face question. And I'm just wondering, and that's why you can all say like, stop it now. But for me, it would be really going to the different communities and asking what are your biggest needs. And I'm working for the moment, for example, with the UN, with UNFCCC in the Global Innovation Hub, where we said at some point, can we bring all what we discuss at COP down to just core human needs? And I'm talking again about housing or shelter, about access, about food, just to make sure that the basic needs are covered. And I think this discussion is an important one on how do we go about participation, about equality, about gender. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to just making it to the end of the day and surviving, what is actually the first need we need to fulfill? And that will be, I think, different in every culture, in every community. And it's not to say that this question on gender is less important. I think it's at some point the question, if you need to survive, what needs to come first, because we can't address everything at a time. And by even giving that reply, I feel it's like I'm not fully convinced myself, but it's just trying to feel like how do you address that? But are you still open to go into that dialogue? And I think that's for me the most important thing, to really answer first the needs and then to say this is what we actually want to install. But I'm also curious, Carmen, for your own answer and experience, because now the question is triggering me.
Yes, Carmen, can you say something from your side?
Yeah, so when I talk with people, or I did a one-day Better Cities Film Festival here in Birmingham, and we showed a film about aging in place, and one young woman said, I never ever thought about how older people move throughout the city. But I'm sure she also never thought about a lot of things. She was like, I just knew it was hard, and it was just accepted. And I'm like, okay, she's a queer young Black woman, and I'm like, so you're just accustomed to things being hard. And if something is hard, you think that's just the way it is, as opposed to, no, it should not be hard. Things should not be difficult. And there is something that not only I can do, but I should do. And so I think that's where this is coming from, because when, if I bring up, different interventions in the city or different concepts, there's just this almost an abdication of, well, it's hard because it's always been hard for us. And so we just keep going anyway. Like we persevere anyway. And while that resilience is admirable, it actually doesn't help progress, because
being recorded.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So while it's admirable, it doesn't help progress, because when it's time to speak up or say things, or when when you have an opportunity to change things, you're not identifying these as problems. You're just identifying them as hard. And since the course of your life is hard and you're praised for your resilience, you just keep up with the hard things as opposed to trying to make your existence less hard. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes sense. So, Rosina, you want to moderate some of the questions that we have from the audience?
Yeah, while my voice is here, I think I can. I think, Ragda, you had your hand up, but I know Paula also had put a question in the chat a while ago. Ragda, did you want to respond to that previous conversation, or did you have another question? Because then I'll jump to Paula first. Is that okay?
Yeah, I would love to reflect on Carmen's question, or a very important question actually. But thank you for this inspiring session, all the speakers, and Carmen. Yeah, I find it very interesting what you just raised, and I think having a media background myself, I think media representation is a big way to realize how the other are living and how your situation, because we understand ourselves a lot of the times through comparison or relevancy to the other. Like when I was living in the Middle East, if you consume the media in the Middle East, you might not see how women are like walking outside, or like how do you behave in a public space. So through media, and sometimes of course it lacks representation, you get to realize other realities that are outside of your own space. So I think a big way to realize yourself is by comparing to other realities, and especially through media representation. And I think thanks to that, the queer community and other marginalized communities are realizing how to operate in a space. So we have to bring more these stories of these women. They have to see themselves, or of course, all genders as well. We have to see themselves in media, and they have to see how also other situations are there, because as you said, they're very resilient themselves, and sometimes the hardships to them, they feel very content with it. A lot of women in the Middle East would say, oh, thank God that I can like walk in the street, or it's we just walk in the morning instead of night, because then there is a daylight. So it's good to show these examples of how realities are in that comparison. But this is also my thought, because it's a very difficult topic. But thank you, everyone. Thank you, Nahan, for the gender city as well. It was very interesting, and all the other speakers. And yeah, love to be part of the conversation.
Carmen, you want to say any lasting words on that at all? Or have we lost her? And if so, then Ragda, thanks for that feedback. Paula? No, I was going to say, Carmen, you want to say anything to that, to any lasting words on that at all, or any feedback there, or you're good?
Oh no, it's just a question that I continue to try to answer and ideate on, and just also wanted to bring to the forefront about how, I know we talk about resilient cities in a different way, but when we're dealing with the resiliency of marginalized people, the tools that we use may need to be tweaked because of their higher tolerance for discomfort. That's all.
We'd love to do a session on that, actually, Carmen. I know that we were sort of chatting about having you on in one of the future sessions, but it'd be really good talk about it forward in. Paula, finally, so thank you, Carmen, for that. Paula, I don't know if you can unmute at all, and if you want to participate and ask your question live, I know you'd also put it in the chat. Do you want to read that out, or?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Thank you, Rosina. Sorry, I can't put my video on. The Zoom isn't recognizing my webcam, but you can see my picture there, so it's all good. So my question is, and I'm sorry, I was a little late into the dialogue. I had an overlapping meeting before that, but I'm always curious about how you encourage policymakers to understand and adjudicate a value to inclusive public interaction spaces. So beyond the sort of mixed spaces where you expect a transactional interaction of businesses, then that help put out infrastructure like cafe chairs or stools or benches for the public to use, but the transactional understanding is that you are buying their wares, their coffee, food, what have you. How do you get beyond that concept of transactional use so that when, for example, those stores or cafes or whatever are closed at other times during the day or evening, the spaces still can be used by the public for just family gathering, strolls on Sundays, what have you, but when there's not necessarily a transactional element for people to necessarily have to buy something to use that space. And the reason why I'm asking is because beyond where I live in Canada, beyond public parks, which have few benches, I think they're almost placed there for look and see possibilities, not really so much in the way of interactional possibilities, for momentary, sitting and using for maybe 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, but not for people to actually spend an afternoon on a public lawn in a public park and have a picnic with your family, for example. There are other parks that are designated for that, but within a city, there should be multiple uses for public spaces, like public squares, like public parks. And the only thing that I can think of apart from that is our public library system, where some of the libraries have fenced enclosure space, which can be used for programmed events. So again, transactional to the library, but not really open to the public for just, wandering and sitting in, have a stroll and enjoying the sunshine, for example. So how do you encourage, if the notion of public spaces is that in municipalities, how do you encourage then policymakers to take one step further and make them more inclusive? And see the value in just having public spaces for their own sake?
That's
a loaded question. Sorry.
Yes, no, that's very tough question, I guess, for our speakers. Anyone wants to answer?
Happy to throw in a couple of elements in the debate. I think part of the answer is in your question itself, I think. But let me first I think I recognize what you put in the discussion, but I think also that I've seen too many cities that were still functionally designed, and where there was given space for indeed parks or for shops or for industry, whatever you have. And I think there, and maybe as said, in the Belgium situation, we have quite a dense urban area, so there's always competition for space. But I see a movement the last couple of years in many cities, not only in Europe, but also beyond, on how to use space in multiple ways, taking into account what is a day function, what is a night function, but also how do you bring interaction at many different times of the day. And a good example was we had a discussion a couple of months ago here in Antwerp on, is there still space for skaters in a city? Because everything is now designed that you actually cannot skate because it's considered as well, bringing a lot of noise and not easy for everyone. But how to then, if you rethink it, how do we design it for kids to play with elements in the city, or for skaters, for interaction? And when I said part of the answer might be in your question, it's all linked to transaction, of course. What is the value you contribute to all of these elements you want to reinstall or bring in? And when we now look at planning, it's often built on data, and the data is often functional or efficient, or what is it contributing to either a cost or an economy. I think there the transaction, we should also bring more into the data to say, what's the social value? What's that indeed interaction value? And can we put a number on it? Because if not, we always gonna keep planning in terms of what's the cost of installing it, of maintaining it. And that's for me also part of the larger answer. How do we bring in things that are not monetarized today? And don't want to say that everything needs to be monetarized, but if you want to create value and if you want to go towards more inclusion, towards more resilience, I think it's also showing that if you bring that value there, or can bring it there by better using spaces, it will probably lessen the cost in other fields, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in crime, whether it's in people being home. And I think these elements, by just putting that value right into the whole mix, will already help to give a multiple function to spaces, but we're not here yet. When we look at the planning, and it starts with education, of course, when I look at architects or urban planners, they are still often trained in a really traditional way, and everything needs to have a proper function. And I think there we should allow a bit more the chaos and complexity.
Do you know of observatories that are actually looking at the data and putting out that research, so that, I mean, if you have references in terms of specific organizations that are specifically looking at functional, non-transactional use of public spaces, so that you can then look at what the cost benefit is to alleviating costs in other sectors like health, as you mentioned, like poverty reduction programs, or housing, or food banks, for example. I think that also would be a driving factor to encourage public policy makers to spend the tax dollars on better use, multiple use, inclusive and inviting public spaces that are constantly using, and then realize as well that the cost of maintenance of those public spaces is factored in, and it's sustainable based on the model of spending a little more here, and so that you spend a lot less in other places that are of concern.
Well, not
in my sleep,
observatories, but happy if you can reach either in the chat or via private message and send me your email. But I know a couple of organizations that have been looking at it. I think they did a couple of studies, but I need to check, and happy to send you some information if I can find it back.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll connect via LinkedIn then.
No,
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Anybody else have any other ideas? I'd be happy to hear other ideas about this.
Yes, we think we have still a few other, answers or questions, because we are running out of time. It's more than 1 hour and a half now. So
okay. Can I just say one last thing? Sorry, I also put another link in the chat
Yes.
That has to do with greater media awareness. I know that Carmen, I think, mentioned there has to be a greater amount of media awareness to be able to ensure that the presence of the different sectors of society that feel marginalized are actually brought in front of mind to the general public. So I noticed a series that had just started on our Canadian Broadcasting Corporation website called Push, which is quite interesting because they're all people with mobility challenges, and as a group of friends, and also spending time with one another in public spaces, they're constantly lobbying their local municipality for more inclusive spaces that they can interact in. And also ability to interact even with public offices or private areas, so that the difficulty, as what Carmen was mentioning, how it's hard to move around when you have mobility challenges, is lessened or improved, so that there aren't these physical barriers to their involvement in city life. And so I thought I'd point that out. If you have a chance, if you have a VPN, you should be able to access it if you don't happen to be in Canada, but I'm sure that you can find it some other way. That's an interesting series, so I'd encourage you. And if you know of other series that inspire others to do something similar, I'd really be interested in knowing more about it. So feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'd be happy to find out. And the last thing that I just one sort of thing I want to put out there, if anybody's interested in looking at the future of public spaces or including it in a narrative for future spaces, I'm doing a bit of speculative fiction on ecological alternatives for speculative fiction, and I'm interested in including aspects of alternative ecological future spaces in that narrative that I'm writing. So if anybody was interested in having a conversation or a virtual cup of tea, I'd be happy to encourage that as well. So feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you, Paola.
Thank you to everybody. It's a really great talk.
So I think we can close this session, since now it's late. Thank you. I see at the end of all these different talks, I see a lot of excitement and people start to talk, ask a question, share projects, contacts. And so this is creating a nice energy around our program of talks, which is very good. This is what we are expecting actually from this initiative. I think today we have covered the topic from many different perspectives and geographical approaches. So I would like to thank the speakers that joined today, Maria, Jorn, and Nuran. This session is recorded, so we will make it available later. Rosina also is working on implementation of the website of this initiative. Maybe Rosina, you want to say something regarding this?
Yeah, just that we've been working on this for a while, and of course this is the 7th talk, so we've uploaded all the talks that were also formerly on YouTube, and they will be on the website as well, which we hope to share over the next week actually, or probably when we've uploaded this talk. And we share it with the many registrants that were for this session, as well as the participants that joined here. So we certainly plan to, as I said, share that with everyone. And also we'll be potentially, working with some people in South Asia as well to implement a small project there as well. So we hope to be sharing details on that as well. And obviously keep in contact with you all, and we'll have the details on the newsletter soon. So again, just thank you to all the speakers. Thank you for joining us and supporting our initiative. And we hope you join us for the next talk.
Thank you very much. So see you soon.